of today, which is by Yasmeet from Rixon Lab and Anouar from IIeX. IIeX is one of the winners of the IIeX Innovation Exchange competition. I think they won the last one in North America. And I know that Yasmeet is one of the people at the client side who really has a vision for the future of research. And at Rixon Lab, they try out new startups, let's say almost every single day, new startups within the market research industry. And I think that's truly what this conference is about the fresh, the new, the innovative, and daring and being brave to experiment with it. And they will tell that story, how a startup in market research works together with, let's say, one of those bigger companies and how Yasmeet managed to sell the innovation internally. So it should be very, very interesting.
Thank you, Tom. A very warm welcome to all of you. I see some familiar faces from last IIeX and some new faces out here, so it's really exciting. I'm looking forward to the next 2 days. The topic today, the trophy spouse, and we'll talk a little bit about why we chose this particular subject. But before we move into this, I'd like to give you a brief introduction about Rixon Consumer Lab. Though I think Rixon does not need any introduction. We are there in almost 180 countries, running about 1,000 networks for telecom operators across the globe. We have a very large footprint, but I think it takes a mention to look at why a business-to-business company like Rixon is choosing to get deeper into understanding consumer insights, and that's essentially our vision at Rixon Consumer Lab. Recently, we actually celebrated 20 years at Rixon Consumer Lab. And we've been studying consumer behavior and trends for the past 20 years, representative, and the insights that we have gathered is essentially representative of 1.1 billion people. So we go out every year to about 40 countries annually. We speak to about 1 million respondents, and all this data is being gathered in-house within Rixon. We just don't have a global presence, which is, of course, me based out in Stockholm in Sweden with a group of about 10 people at Rixon Consumer Lab, but we also have a regional footprint in 10 regions where we can gather local behaviors and local insights that get into Rixon. Now I'll let Anur introduce IIeX.
Sure. Thank you. So IIeX started as an academic project, actually here in Amsterdam, at the University of Amsterdam, where I started as a PhD candidate. And I wasn't actually interested in market research at all, but I was simply forced to do research within marketing because that was my position at the time. And I started looking into market research, and I was really surprised how market research was conducted. And I developed IIeX because I want to improve market research. I want to make it much and much better. And in this particular instance, by making it real. And I will tell you about that later. So we started in 2013, not a long time ago. It was only an academic project. And last year, we started to get a lot of traction, a lot of interest from the industry. And that's also when we decided to participate in the competition. Because of our platform, we have been able to conduct a lot of studies. So we have been already conducted 200 studies since inception, even though we're very small.
Great, right. So let me just talk about what has happened to me, with me, essentially, in the past few weeks. So in the past few weeks, I did a trip down to Silicon Valley with a group of people at Rixon, and we were entrusted with the task of, okay, go out into the Silicon Valley and really establish what are the big reasons behind why innovation flourishes just in Silicon Valley. And come back and get that inspiration and see how we can accelerate innovation in the jobs that we do at Rixon. And one of the partners that we met at Silicon Valley, essentially the investment climate at Silicon Valley, we understand is very conducive. And one of the companies that we met was Clara Perkins. Now, for people who don't know Clara Perkins, it's one of the most successful venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. They are behind most successful technology startups now pretty much established companies like Facebook, Twitter, and Amazon. So very well-established sort of venture capital firm. And we had about an hour with the partner, Randy Commissar, out here to really talk about what is that really ticks with Silicon Valley. Why is that, if we were to kind of put startups away from Silicon Valley, maybe in Copenhagen, Stockholm, or anywhere else in the world, you won't really find them to be very successful. So what's the reason behind it? And it was interesting to hear through the story of Randy Commissar. Randy is a great guy. I mean, he's an ex-senior counsel of Apple, and he's one of the most well-known partners of Clara Perkins with a big portfolio. These guys actually do early-stage investments, looking at technology startups, life sciences startups, and also green science. So pretty established guy. And what he was really telling me is that he hasn't had a single successful deal for the past 2 years, since 2011. It was only in February 2014 that he struck gold by selling a company called Nest to Google. And Nest is a smart home hardware maker. Clara Perkins invested $20 million in Nest. And guess what? The return was $400 million. Pretty phenomenal. But this guy hasn't been successful for the past 2 years, and suddenly he brings peace to all his partners with a big bang for a buck for $400 million. And what Randy was telling us was that really 90% of the time that he makes those bets on startups, those startups fail. It's only 1% of those bets that really make it big. And then we started talking about, and this was really interesting, and then we started talking about, yes, okay, of course, you are a risk taker and you can take those risks. But what about us? How do we take this back in our company and start kind of looking at startups and partnerships and innovation? Why is that we need to really establish ourselves in Silicon Valley? And of course, we have an office in San Jose, but that's just more like an operational office rather than doing a lot of innovative work. And there was one thing which Randy told me at that point of time, which I really reflect back. And that was that the Valley can absorb failure. And that is a characteristic of the Silicon Valley. Failure is not attached to you personally. It's not there on your CV. And that's a very important fact. And when I reflect on this and I look at, okay, at the end of the trip, after we met a lot of venture capital firms, and also a lot of technology startups, we came back and we said, okay, we need to reflect on what Randy said, which is Valley can absorb failure. Can we absorb failure? The answer is no. And it is an obvious answer. We can't absorb failure. That's not part and parcel of how big brands work. Of course, how I am concerned, and the research business that I'm concerned with, I'm not ready to accept failure. So the big question for me is really, how do we avoid failure? And that's where the insight innovation competition really comes in, because it helps you mitigate risks attached with failure. Because there are some cool startups that are not being vetted by me individually, but by you guys out here. And those are the cream sort of technology startups that are coming on the stage and presenting to us. So we've had the honor to work with the past 2 winners, including IIeX. Is Eric around in the room from Rivi? Yes, okay. Right, so we've been involved working with almost all of the winners of Insight Innovation Competition. And what it also means is that we have had some sort of learnings to look at what clicks and what doesn't click when working with startups. Not just with IIeX and Rivi, but a lot of other different MR startups that come to us pitching for solutions, pitching for working with brands like us. So when I first met with IIeX on Insight Innovation Competition, and I was really impressed with the way that these guys were working, a disruptive idea, and very, very interesting proposition. And then we started talking on Twitter, and we realized that this was a perfect match. Rixon, wedding, IIeX, a perfect match, right? And instantly we just kind of got along. We started talking. I remember, we used to spend like an hour or 2 just speaking on the phone, trying to really hash out the details of this particular partnership. But guess what? The day we said I do, and we went into the relationship. Since that day, we haven't agreed on a single damn thing. And that's what relationships actually do to you. You know, somebody told me, a marriage doesn't work if one partner is happy and the other one is miserable. It works if both are miserable. So we have made our lives pretty much miserable for each other, right? So hear us out in terms of how we make each other's life miserable, right? So I'm gonna, and this whole factor of miserable comes in because of perceptions. Perceptions that startups probably have of firms like Rixon, and perception that Rixon or established clients and brands have of these startups. So let me tell you how probably Anur perceived us when you started working with us, right?
Yes, so when I got in touch with Jasmeet, and to be honest, it was actually, I think, one of our bigger clients, one of the bigger clients we had in the beginning, even though we worked with some, but it would be, you know, quite decentralized. And I thought, you know, we're going to do this quite quickly. And we started chatting, we started talking a lot, how we could set up the experiment, how we can set up the study. And then I noticed this is going to take some time. And for me, there was a lot of uncertainties, but, you know, sure, this is Rixon, you know, let's go ahead and start working on this. So basically, we had to have faith, which is strange, you know, for a business, you're in a business, so this notion of having faith is really strange. But that's what we actually did. You know, we have faith in this thing, we have faith in the fact that we can prove our worth, but we also have faith that Rixon will keep to his word.
Okay, right. So how Anur actually perceived us is this big elephant wanting to run like a greyhound. That's not going to happen, my friend, right? It's never going to happen. And that actually brings about this conflict, right? And it might feel like a situation where one partner feels like a trophy spouse. And the trophy spouse is essentially an informal term which is often used for a female, young, attractive, literally young, attractive, you know, you being used as a status symbol by an old, wealthy, stodgy man. So you know who the old, wealthy, stodgy man is in this scenario and who's the young, attractive female, right? But this was a scenario in terms of how startups perceived Rixon, that we are going to run this race and we're going to run it pretty quickly at a very fast pace. Guess what? 6 months down the line, after working with startups, how do they perceive us? This is how they perceive us. A sloth running at a speed of 0.003 miles per hour. And what the perception that I hear from these guys is that, okay, you guys are inflexible, you're slow-moving, contracts take a huge amount of time working, and it's just a pain working with you guys. And that's an actual reality. So you see the change in perception, right? You know, and I talked about how we used to spend a lot of time talking on the phone. We spend about hours and hours hashing out the details. We hardly talk now. I don't think we talk more than 5 minutes on a phone without kind of disagreeing on something. The other perception that you know, and I would say what you guys essentially have as startups is, okay, we're going to bring all the ideas, you bring the cash on the table. That's excellent in an ideal scenario. But that's not going to work, my friend. Because what we want you to do is prove that your idea works in our reality. We want you to prove, and we want you to execute. So trials and pilots are going to be a reality before you actually see any cash coming to you. And that's what startups need to really understand. Expecting to get in immediately, clinching a deal or clinching a contract with big established clients is a long process. It's not going to be that way. So you saw some of the changes in perceptions and conflicts that are there and existing in this one. But I want to talk a little bit about, of course, we went into this relationship, right? And I want to talk about how Whalings proved their worth and how they helped Rixon and in what scenarios. The biggest advantage of having a company like Whalings working with a brand like Rixon was they rectified our inaccuracies. So let me give you some background on what sort of inaccuracies, right? People from US, anybody from US out here? Yeah? Okay. Right, so the mobile operators in US are suddenly on this spree of launching a lot of innovative data plans in the market today, right? And you see some of the ads out there. The bottom one is actually from T-Mobile. You have the AT&T mobile share. So a lot of innovative packaging and pricing around data plans are being launched in the market today, right? A lot of these are innovations, and they are being copied by a lot of mobile operators across the globe. Now, as Rixon, as a partner setting up the networks and advising mobile operators, our job also is to help them assess whether these pricing and packaging plans are going to be successful for the other operators in their markets, right? So what we were doing really is looking at answering questions for our customers who are leading mobile operators, that what is the true value these innovations are going to bring to me, right? And when we looked at these innovations and we started looking at testing these concepts and willingness to pay in new markets, we got a lot of data which was available to us. But we were still doing this in a more traditional way, in a more traditional manner. Now comes in Whale-Links, because we, of course, had a lot of data. So then Anur is going to talk a little bit about how they changed the game and rectified our inaccuracies.
Okay, very briefly, Whale-Links, we do research where we measure willingness to pay, but in a real setting, in an auction. And that means people need to put the money where their mouth is. So basically, we tested the added value of Ericsson's technologies in an auction where we presented different data plans, where we differ the attributes, and people actually have to place a bid.
Great, right.
So what we're able to do is we're able to come up with, from proposal to deliver within 1 week. That's how quick we are at the moment. It only takes 66 seconds for our participants to complete the study, and 36 did it on their mobile. So we have a wide range of respondents participating in the auction. And then something very interesting was found. Namely, that 258% more was paid, people are willing to pay when the survey was hypothetical. And that's exactly the point of working with us. It needs to be real. And this is the bias we found when we did it hypothetically.
Great, right. So what Anur is telling you is that the data that we had from our traditional surveys was grossly inaccurate by almost 258%. And guess what? We were advising using this data to our operators, customers. We were just shooting ourselves in the leg. So that's where these guys came in, and you guys were really successful. I mean, all hats off to them in rectifying some of our biggest inaccuracies when it comes to doing traditional research and innovating in how we do research today. But since then, it's been very difficult to integrate Whale-Links into our standard MR machinery. And some of the reasons that we see that it isn't been easy for us to kind of get in is because of the issues of selling such ideas internally. There are a lot of stakeholders, there are a lot of roadblocks out there. Some of this are going to be pretty obvious for you. Of course, it's you yourself who has to believe in the idea, but it's also your team who has to believe in an idea. Just to give you an example, I was trying to kind of get a vendor who was successful in online communities and do-it-yourself research. And we said this is going to be the path that we will take, how we do research. My own teams were a little wary about going into this innovation. You know why? Because everybody wants to travel. Everybody wants to travel to focus groups and attend in-depth interviews. That's a reality. You take that away from a researcher, it's going to be a hard sell. Talking about purchasing and sourcing departments, when you talk about with the sourcing guys that, hey, we have a nice innovation coming in to Rixon and we want to integrate it with our MR machinery, the first thing they said is, how many units do we need to buy? They're not accustomed to how we want to operate in this new reality. So those are some very difficult buy-ins that you need to do. So you need to cross the bridge out here. So the reality that startups need to know is we know how to hop the ropes, but we can't sprint. So you need to be in for a marathon. This is going to take some time. It's not going to be an easy sell to go ahead and take innovations and pass that on to and clinch cash immediately. So, but as I say, points of contention still remain. We still continue to feel like a trophy spouse here and there. And there are some points of contention that you have as well, Anur.
Okay. I know time is almost up, or it's already up. So let me be very brief. So the potential internal roadblocks is we're still small, so we don't have a global reach yet. So please take that into account when you're working with us. The second roadblock is setting mutual expectations. Because of our inexperience, sometimes things that are obvious to are not obvious to us, and the other way around. And the third point is, how do you manage requested features? I mean, we have developed a system, we're very flexible, but it's always a challenge when new features are requested.
Great. And then points of contention from our side. Most of the startups that I've seen actually come out with a marginal niche. They have an obscure niche that they have established for themselves, and maybe that's because they don't want to take on competition head on. And that's good, but you're not solving big problems. You're solving small problems. So I have a lot of startups that come up to me and say, hey, we can take Conjoin to mobile. That's great, but what's the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So that's a marginal niche, which is still a point of contention. Exclusivity and IPR still remains a point of contention. When we open up our relationships and do the matchmaking for companies like Waylinks to panel providers, we expect exclusivity. We don't want to lose our competitive advantage to our competitors. And that still remains a point of contention for us for working with MR startups. And then, we don't want people who just want to be mercenary entrepreneurs saying, this is my vision, this is how we want to do it. We want people to be adaptive to the reality of how big brands want to work. So some level of customization is very important in your technology and your platform. So I'm going to just end out here and say that, IIeX is a great platform for you guys to find that serial innovator. And when I say a serial innovator, there's a book that you should always read out here, which is how entrepreneurs actually do innovation and become serial innovators in established companies. These guys are very, very hard to find. Almost 1 in 50 in small firms, 1 in 500 in Fortune 200 companies. But what IIeX does is gets those serial innovators out here in under one single roof. So have a great time dating at IIeX, find the right partner for yourself, be a power couple, and live happily ever after.